Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Step Up Podcast. The name of this episode is So Everybody Can Move, the fight for access to prosthetic and orthotic care. My name is Scott Baronic. I'm a certified prosthetist, and I'm with Nate Capa, certified prosthetist with Bremer Prosthetics.
And along with being a certified prosthetist for Bremer Prosthetics, I'm also the state lead in Michigan for an initiative called So Everybody Can Move. And in addition to being state lead, I'm also on the national steering committee for this initiative. So what So Everybody Can Move is it's a national initiative that is set up to change laws at a state-based level. So all across the country, in 50 different states, we're trying to change state laws. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to change those laws to compel insurance companies to cover orthotics and prosthetics that are designed for exercise and physical movement. And specifically, to change the definition of medical necessity to include exercise. You know, you and I can sit here and we can just make the assumption and know that exercise is medically necessary, that there's all these inherent health benefits, physical and emotional, right?
As you say, wouldn't exercise lower healthcare costs?
I mean,
anyway?
Overall, there's tons of studies that show that they do. But a lot of times, currently, insurance policy is a lot less likely to be focused on long-term care than short-term care, or that short-term dollars today than what are long-term dollars. I could get into some reasons for that. Maybe I even will. I think a big problem with our current insurance system is that we as individuals are compelled to buy our own private insurance through our employers until we're 65 years of age. So these private insurance companies, it's their duty to cover our care until we're 65.
Right.
But then at that time that we turn 65, they're off the hook.
Right.
They're not really responsible for these long-term benefits. These go to taxpayers in the Medicare system.
Right.
That our personal tax dollars funding the Medicare system are what really are paying the dollars for these long-term things. So wouldn't it reduce the overall costs? Yes, but whose costs? Unfortunately, it's not these private insurers. Their costs are likely to be capped at the age of 65, and then somebody else has to pay for all these things that they didn't cover for this whole time.
Right.
So that we're not here to solve that today,
Right.
but I think that's a big part of the problem and about why aren't they just naturally doing this? Well, because these long-term costs aren't their responsibility.
Right.
And so they don't have a reason to care
Right.
about that. It doesn't affect their bottom line. So unfortunately, we have to go to the states and we have to actually make laws that tell them you have to do this. You have to include exercise as being something that's medically necessary. It's not a luxury. It's not deluxe. It's not all these dehumanizing terms that they like to use for a prosthesis that does more than basic walking. So that's the one thing about about So Everybody Can Move. There is a national coalition that kind of oversees this whole thing. And a lot of our national organizations that represent orthotics and prosthetics, including NAAOP, which I'm president of, the Amputee Coalition, AOPA, and the Academy are all part of the core group. So there's a lot of buy-in from everybody across the nation for this. It's really focused on equity. So we want to ensure that people with limb loss and limb difference, especially children and underserved populations, can access the tools they need to move, exercise, and thrive. And then finally, it's driven by grassroots advocacy. I'm sitting here saying that I'm the state lead for this, and that is part of it. I do a lot of advocacy for this, but ultimately my number one goal is not to be the face of this movement. My goal is to teach and empower people that are actually need to use a prosthesis, that are harmed by this, to teach them how they can come up and they can be the ones that drive this change. It's easy for an insurance company to sit there and say, I'm a greedy provider and I only want this for my benefit. I mean, it's just not the case. For one, I mean, the benefit isn't what they would, kind of allude to and all those things. Right. But for two, for me, this is personal to me because I see so often in my everyday care for people
Right.
that they don't have the tools that they need to follow the treatment plan that I make because their insurance company tells them that it's not medically necessary. I want them to have access to the tools that they need so that they can maximize their functional outcomes and their rehabilitation. So that's the great thing about So Everybody Can Move is that it's really hyper-focused on that, on putting the person with limb loss or limb difference in front and getting them to be the ones that drive this change. All the way to the point that, you know, our tagline for the whole thing is empower through movement.
Right.
So we're trying to empower people by giving them the ability to move. Also, this is a national movement, so there's a little play on words there. We think movement is medicine, and that physical activity is a right, not a privilege. But today, millions of children and adults in the U.S. with limb loss, limb difference, and other mobility impairments are unable to afford and access life-changing prosthetic and orthotic care that helps them be physically active for one reason, due to inadequate insurance coverage. So Everybody Can Move is working to change this through state-by-state legislative action, expanding access to this medically necessary care.
Okay.
So we talked about the fact that we're trying to change the laws at a state-based level. This is all part of a long-term strategy that we call 28 by 28, with the ultimate goal of this movement being that in the year 2028, when the Paralympics are here in Los Angeles, well, not here, but in the United States, in Los Angeles, that we're able to launch a federal campaign and actually get this law changed at a federal level so that there's equity to this and that there's equal access across the entire nation. The way that we're trying to do that is we're trying to have 28 different states have this law passed before then. Because what we found is at the federal level, when you can have a majority of states agree to something, you're much more likely to get the federal government to say, well, you know what, this seems to make sense. If the majority of the states are doing this, why wouldn't it be done at the federal level?
Right.
Now, what we've unfortunately learned through this process is that the way that insurance laws are written in this country, some insurance plans are dictated by state level laws and some are dictated by federal level laws. So even if 28 by 28 is successful and we're able to get a federal movement for this, we will still have to get 50 different bills passed at the state level so that everyone in this country has the same access. So there's some real problems with that. I mean, we're not here to think that we have the capability to solve systemic problems with our insurance, to change the whole thing. But what we really want to do is make sure that everybody in this country has access to exercise and movements that, make them feel whole and make them, feel more complete.
So have any states successfully passed this legislation up to this point?
Yeah, so right now, in about 2.5 years that we've been doing this movement, 12 states have fully enacted this legislation.
12 states.
12 states. That's a big number.
Okay.
That's a big number for an effort like this. I mean, this thing really has caught fire.
Yeah.
This has more support and, passion behind it than anything that I've ever seen in my career. I mean, those of us that have been kind of involved in advocacy a lot, that have really been on the front of these things, have really sat back and kind of thought, we need something that unifies us. Yeah. The way that this has brought people together and unified people in this country has been that catalyst that we've been looking for. It really just makes us so excited.
I've been working in prosthetics for 30 years. If you would have said to somebody even 5 years ago, they would have thought something like this wouldn't have been possible. So
Correct.
That's a huge deal.
Correct. When we started it, we really thought that it was a grandiose idea, kind of pie in the sky. Like, we know how important this
Sounds
is.
noble.
And it's a noble cause and it's the right thing. Sometimes you have to fight noble causes, right? Sometimes, even if you're not going to get it, you have to be the one that starts the fight, that starts to change the social narrative, that starts to introduce ideas that people hadn't considered before, even if you don't think that you're going to get it done. But then we started getting it done.
Yeah, no.
And it's like, and I mean, in this year, we're likely to see even additional legislation passed this year in other states too. So, I mean, 2026 isn't over. That's a big question, just because legislatively things happen so fast and unexpectedly. But I mean, I know that at least in North Carolina, the bill is sitting on the governor's desk ready to be signed.
Okay.
So that would put us at 13.
Do you think the 28 by 28 seems likely?
It seems very realistic.
Okay,
I
well,
think the 28 by 28.
Okay.
Now, of course, you
I love that concept. That's why I asked.
You think, of course, sometimes you start with low hanging fruit, right? Like maybe we picked off some easy states here, and like the fight's going to get harder as we go. But then when you look at the states that this has happened in, that's not necessarily the case. The places that it's been happening are the places that have the most engaged and enthusiastic participants.
Okay.
You know, what this really comes down to is explaining to legislators, congressmen, governors, those people, that this even exists.
Right.
I mean, so often, you know, you sit there and you talk to somebody and you're like, well, they don't cover this for exercise. And they're like, that's ridiculous. So you're telling me that a kid can't go play sports, that an insurance company would say that it's luxury or deluxe for a kid to go play soccer. Now, I hate to use that example because I'm not a soccer person myself.
Right.
But again, there's a lot of benefits to all that running, and it's, you know, letting the person be engaged in what they want, right?
Right.
And what's important to them, not what is important to me. I'll even do this so that kids can play soccer.
Right.
That's how important it is to me.
But I mean, it's funny to use an example of something that you may not particularly like. I think is a good example because it's the right to do what they want to do.
Right, exactly.
Not what we decide for them.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
that's why I think that's a beautiful example.
Exactly. And so, you know, when you tell it that they can't play soccer with their peers, when you say that this person isn't able to ride a bike with their spouse,
Right.
or doesn't have the tools to take a shower safely, let alone swim or do, you know, recreational activities in the water, you tell these things to people and they're shocked. There's just an inherent shock value when you say insurance companies are allowed to have policies that prohibit people from doing these things. That it doesn't mean that laws get passed. That shock value can lose. I mean, we know insurance companies are big campaign contributors to a lot of politicians. There's a lot of pressure to not get this passed. But even in the face of that, we've been able to get 12, almost 13.
Right.
So do I think 28 by 28 is a realistic goal? Yes, I absolutely do. Yep. And I think that we can keep doing it.
If you don't mind me,
No, please.
You know, as it's one thing to talk about like playing soccer or riding a bike, and those things are, you know, that's great too, and you know, the exercising and all that stuff. But you know, if you look at something like just running,
Right.
I mean, you know, if you play soccer, you need a ball. To
Right.
ride a bike, you need a bike.
Right.
But humans run.
Right.
It's just
Right.
dynamic human activity.
Right.
And you know, amputees are less than 1% of the population. To run on a prosthetic limb
Right.
is so much impact on the body, and just walking with a prosthetic limb does so much wear and tear on the other side. When you add that, when you build a prosthetic limb for running, what it does is it absorbs that impact, and it reduces that wear and tear
Right.
on the body so much more than what a standard everyday prosthetic limb can. So you're just giving them, you know, something that allows, I mean, it's great. They should have access to those other exercise
Right.
ones too, but you're just allowing them to do what the human body was designed to do.
Right.
That's a basic right.
Right. And I mean, when you look at the things, it's like walking is biomechanically so different from running that there's no such thing as kind of, you know, well, what if you just make one that they can walk or run on?
Right.
Well, all you're doing is making one that's not very good for walking and not very good for running. It's not very good for either one. You've made concessions that really make it suboptimal for both things, and that can have such bad effects later on muscle pain or on joint pain, on muscle imbalances, on lower backs and knees, and all these things that, you know, it's just inherent. And you know, the thing about it is a lot of times people think, well, the cost of this is going to be so astronomical. A prosthesis is an expensive thing. Nobody's going to sit here and say that a prosthesis isn't expensive, but very, very often somebody's specialized activity prosthesis is less costly than their everyday prosthesis. It actually costs less for their specialized prosthesis because a lot of those safety features, you think about it, somebody that's running is doing it in a very purposeful manner. They don't need a safety feature that says, well, what if I'm absent-minded and I take a misstep? You're less likely to take a misstep while running. You're less likely to do those things. So those things kind of get in the way of that activity. So it actually drives down the cost of these specialized prosthetics. We don't often see microprocessor components on a specialty prosthesis.
Right.
We don't often see those kinds of things. So it's ultimately that right now insurance companies are so in tune with not paying the price that patients are the ones who are paying the price.
Right.
And they're paying it with their bodies, with their physical and mental well-being.
And back to your point about, how they would take away from walking or running. People, they always get fascinated when they see me, wearing my running leg if I'm out running, and they always like to say, "Oh, how do you like that thing?" And I say, "It's great for running, but it's terrible to walk in." I mean, it's uncomfortable. Or if I'm going across the parking lot, if I have it on, I'll do a jog because it's uncomfortable to walk in. So to expect people to, walk around in something like that is
and yet in the real world, I've, through being involved in this movement, I've met kids who decided that they were given the choice that they could only get one prosthesis, and they had to choose between getting an everyday leg that allows them to walk, or the extreme example I can think of is a young boy who's an above the knee amputee, so he doesn't have a knee. He chooses to run with a prosthesis that the knee doesn't bend on. He feels safer. He feels he can run faster. He can just do all of his things. He chooses to sit at his desk in school with an inability to bend his knee, getting into a vehicle, going to a movie theater or concert, living his life with a knee that will not bend, because those things and because the play and that engagement with his peers is so important to him that he would rather that than to be able to bend his knee.
Right.
So, that's, and why should a child be given that choice? Why should that be a choice that a child has to make? It makes no sense.
And imagine during the development how his muscles are being compromised as he's developing.
Absolutely.
Because the hips and...
and it kind of brings us the idea that movement is healthcare.
Yes.
Right? Access to physical activity is essential for cardiovascular health, mental well-being, diabetes management, overall quality of life. All of these things. We know insurance companies right now are the biggest barrier because of their denials of care. We talked about them being not medically necessary and called luxury. You're a runner. Do you consider your running prosthesis a luxury?
Not even close.
I'm a runner. I don't use a prosthesis. I've never been in the middle of a run and thought, this is luxurious.
These are the easy days.
This is the good time. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't have physical, mental benefits for me that outweigh the demand in that moment. But none of those things are a luxury.
No.
At all. So to use that term, it almost makes people think... It programs people to think, well, I shouldn't be asking for this. I'm asking for too much, and I'm the one who's wrong because I even asked.
They provide us, we get benefits in life as a result, but we work for them.
Right.
It's not a luxury.
Right.
Yeah. And, to circle back to your point with the insurance companies, people get fixated on the cost of like $8,000 because they see a sticker item, but if amputees are less than 1% of the population, I don't think what's never really considered, because that population is so small, those costs are only a fraction.
And then when we look at this, because sometimes the dollars still get big when you look at that. They do. I've done the math, and there's sometimes that those dollars still look really big. But the other thing that we have to remember is that in the United States right now, only about 25% to a third of adults exercise. There's no reason to believe that the people with limb loss would be any different representation than that.
No.
It's not like we're looking at it's not like there's something it's inherent with exercise that causes people to lose limbs. So we're like, 100% of the people that lose limbs are going to qualify for these things, are going to need this, and are going to want to, let alone engage in exercise.
Well,
that's just not the reality.
Right.
We're still looking, even of that small percentage of the people that lose a limb, even smaller percentage of those people are really going to benefit from exercise. And, so this doesn't say anywhere, this legislation, nowhere does it say that everybody gets 2 prosthetic limbs. No. Everybody gets this stuff. What it says is that if your doctor deems, if you go to your doctor and your doctor does a full evaluation and looks at you and says, exercise is going to have a specific benefit for you, and I can see that you're not going to be able to exercise because of these deficits with your prosthesis. There's hurdles to get through. We want these things. We do not want this to be something where people can abuse it.
Yeah.
The thing that would break my heart with this whole thing, the thing that would just make me sick to my stomach is that you improve this access, you do this thing, and then you find out later that it's being abused, that there's fraud in it, that there's any of these bad things that could possibly make it even harder in the future for somebody else to get it.
Right.
So we're building in safeguards for insurance companies that, unfortunately, for people that need it, is a little bit extra.
Right.
But my whole thing is that with that, I think that's reasonable because
it's reasonable to show that, hey, this person has the potential to do the activities that we're saying that we're building the device.
And the follow through to go through with those things enough to not just be on a whim. I mean, how many of us wake up on January 1st and say, today's the day I'm going to exercise?
I'm going to lose 30 pounds this year.
You know, and unfortunately, you know, we see that that's not a real sustainable way to get into movement, right? Like those kinds of things, you know, as much as it's born of desire, born of like a real want to do those things, those aren't good ways to design this change. So, you know, people aren't going to, you know, it's not going to be January 2nd and everybody's making appointments with their doctor because their doctor's going to be like, well, come back to me in 3 months and tell me if you know, show me that you've tried, show me that you really want this. And I mean, again, I don't like barriers to access usually, but I think that a little bit of a barrier to access, and this is reasonable. And just in that we don't want to see that abuse. And so keeping those things in it's also an olive branch to the insurance companies to say, look, we're asking you to provide more coverage, but we're also want to work with you so that you can understand why this is so necessary and really understand when it's necessary, how it's necessary, and only be providing it in those cases.
I think it's responsible for adults, but I do think...
Well, kids, it's a little different.
I think for kids it's different because here's the thing. Kids will play, they will be active. And if you deny kids that, what you're going to create is a lifestyle where they are sedentary because they didn't have that opportunity to move while they're young. And you're almost guaranteeing that they're not going to have it.
Very well said. I mean, we talked about 25 to 30% of adults exercise, specifically adults. Now, children are a whole different thing. We're going to expect, I mean, in the kids, we're going to expect that almost every kid is going to have some sort of a physical need that can be met by this. And so this is really hyper focused on improving that access for children. It kind of that's where the whole thing started. When this started, it was called So Kids Can Move. And so we really focused on having it for kids. And then as we got into it a couple months and stuff, we're like, well, what about when this kid that's had access for their whole life turns 19? If it covers up to 18. What happens when they turn 19 and all of a sudden something that they've been able to have their whole life, they have the reasonable expectation that this is part of their medical care. All of a sudden somebody's like, nope, you've done that for forever. You can't do it anymore. If they've already have the habit, if they're involved, this is part of their daily routine, they're likely to continue that when they're 19, when they're 40, when they're 60. These are building good habits that are lifetime habits.
Now you can use that to show that this is a continuum of care because they've already done that stuff. And talking about controlling costs, I mean, we were talking about the amount of people who wear prosthetic limbs that actually exercise, but when you look at the amount of pediatric patients that actually wear prosthetic limbs, that's a very small percentage of the population. So
Exactly. It just goes back to the idea that we really want to eliminate barriers for people that exercise is a priority for them. I mean, you've told the story a lot about, when the first time that you water skied again. Water skiing is not something that we would inherently think of as exercise. Right? I mean, when you say water skiing, you're like, oh, they're out having fun. Well, how much work is it to water ski first?
Well, it depends how you want, if you're competitive or...
Well, but there's a lot, but no matter what, there's a lot of core, there's a lot of balance, there's a lot of there's a lot of demand.
Demand on the body.
There's a lot of demand on the body during water skiing.
Especially slalom skiing as opposed to skiing on two skis,
But so I want you to go through that story a little bit.
Well, so when I lost my leg, the big sport, I didn't see myself really running again, or I didn't know what to expect, obviously. But a sport that I like to do, I love playing basketball, and I didn't think that would be possible. I didn't really know what would be possible, but I thought if I could just water ski again, I figured, I always played sports. I always was active, and I thought it seemed like, well, skiing would be easy because I'm just dragging myself behind a boat, and I don't have to run, and I don't have impact on my leg. I thought if I could do that, I would be happy. Well, the first time I skied, first time I was just happy. I thought if I could get up, I could figure it out. And, I was happy. But then I always talked about learning to ski was kind of like a lot of therapy for me.
Not physical therapy.
A lot of
right?
mental therapy, yes. More mental than physical, because this was the process of me learning to adapt and trying to figure out what was wrong. When you have a prosthetic foot, there's 3/8 inches of the heel that's missing. So when I would go to press back, and at this time, I hadn't really worked in prosthetics a long time, so I didn't understand the mechanics of a lot of things. Eventually I learned to put a wedge in the heel of my water ski and stuff. But, I used to go skiing and I was better than the people that I was skiing with. And now I was underperforming and I was very frustrated because I wasn't there to just ski. I was trying to ski better than I had before.
Right.
I didn't have the sensory feedback from my prosthetic limb. I had to learn how to feel into, because I didn't have an ankle, I had to learn how to balance with my hips and do different things, which took me a couple years to do. And eventually I did. I think the part that you're getting to, that there was a lot of frustration that went to that. But when I came out the other side of that, that was when I said that I didn't appreciate how difficult that would be. And when I came out the other side of that, it was when I said, I felt like I didn't have to put limitations on myself.
Yep.
That was when I said, I've opened my eyes to thinking, well, I'd already started, I didn't run long distances, but I was running shorter distances and doing different things. And I started to think that maybe more things were possible. And of course, a lot of that had to be with, being 2 years post-operative as opposed to being just right away. But,
the term I've heard you use before is that, whole again.
Yes.
Right. And I mean, that's not just a physical thing, right? Can you describe the difference between like physically whole again and mentally whole again?
I mean, just being acceptant of who I am. If people would say, oh, you have I didn't like the term disabled. I was like, don't say I have a disability. I'm the same person I was before. And it took me a while to come to the conclusion where I was actually started working in prosthetics, and, somebody had asked me, I was at a nursing home and I was doing a presentation, and they said, oh, how old were you when you lost your leg? And I said, I was 23. And the nurse said, oh, that's too bad. And that is too bad. That's sad. But for the first time, I became a little defensive. I didn't say anything to her. And then when I was driving home from work that day, I was reflecting on that. And I thought, why was I so defensive about that? And for the first time, I came to realize that that was a turning point in my life. And being an amputee was actually who I was. And I was defending that. And I was actually, because I couldn't be who I am today had I not lost my leg in that motorcycle accident. And that was that, I think, that what you were referring to?
It is. And just kind of like, we talk about all the physical, like the very obvious physical benefits of movement and of exercise, but like I just don't want to gloss over how important it is, to have access. I've talked to other people who, maybe they live out west and they're in rock climbing communities and they lose an arm. Mm-hmm. And now all of a sudden it's like, well, their friends are all going to do this activity that they used to be engaged in, but now they're kind of just excluded.
Yes.
Or their friends are like, sometimes their friends groups are even like, well, we're going to come up with something else that includes you. But it's like, well, they don't want to do something else to be included. They want to do the thing that brought this group together. They want to be involved in that again. And that, like, once they had access to an arm that let them climb, or like just so many different things, something that let them get in the water again. I mean, being here from Michigan, how important is our human connection with water and our ability to get in the water that kind of is the identity of our state?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden to have an insurance company say, well, that's not medically necessary. You don't need to interact with the environment that you were born and raised in. It's like automatically like an isolationist feeling, I have to admit, right? Like you feel like you're on an island and everybody else has access to this thing. And I've heard the horror stories about, kids having to duct tape trash bags over their legs so that they could get into the water and wade, or doing all these things so that they could participate, but at what dehumanizing cost?
I love how you said dehumanizing, because it's already traumatic enough as an amputee. I'm just going to say this, that we already look different and we have to go through it, but then to put a garbage bag over your leg and do this other stuff, as if enough attention, it's just, people are just so not sympathetic to what we have to go through. So anything that draws more attention to that is just so unnecessary in this day and age.
And I mean, I couldn't
when
even...
there's simple solutions to that.
Right. I couldn't even imagine the developmental challenges of a child that just feels so alone.
Yes.
Right? And just feels like they're the only one that's having these problems and everybody else can do those things.
It's not fair.
And they don't get to. And there's only one reason that they can't, and it's because their insurance company says, we don't think it's necessary.
Yep.
We don't see a medical benefit to that. Well, luckily we're here to talk about this movement. It's a real thing, and it's making positive change. You know, we're working on it very hard here in our state of Michigan, but it's also being spearheaded all across the nation. There's only maybe a handful of states that don't have coalitions that are actively working on this in your state right now. So I'd encourage anybody to go to www.soeverybodycanmove.com to kind of learn how to plug into this, see what's happening in your states. Anybody that wants to follow up with questions for us specifically, you can also get us at www.bremerprosthetics.com. And we have some other content on our website, or through our website, our Facebook, and our YouTube channels. So thanks for tuning into this episode of the podcast, and we look forward to seeing you next time.